play. This is Robert Morrow. I just want to let you know that tomorrow, Wednesday, January 25th, I'll be protesting the murderous legacy of Lyndon Johnson outside the entrance of the Zachary Scott Theater. I'm going to be at the Riverside entrance to the Zach Scott Theater, just west of South Lamar. And they all have to walk past me, you know. And I'm going to be there from 5:30 to 7:30 tomorrow night. So it is a go. I've got plenty of signs, and I might bring a couple chairs. And basically, I want to get people, as they're going into the opening night of the LBJ play, The Great Society. That's the game plan. So anyhow, just tell anybody you know who might want to show up. So that's where we'll be, you know, telling the truth that nobody else wants to be telling the truth in the Austin and Texas media. I'll do it.
Started arriving, Clay.
And what are you doing out here today?
I'm out here protesting Lyndon Johnson and his murders of John Kennedy and the USS Liberty and Sam Smithwick prison murder and the Henry Marshall murder of 1961. LBJ murdered JFK, ma'am. And so we're at the play, The Great Society, which is about LBJ and his administration. And they don't want to talk about the mass murders, the serial murders of Lyndon Johnson. Hadn't even gotten to Vietnam. You know, all the millions who died in Vietnam because of Lyndon Johnson putting the United States into that war. We were in that war and nobody voted on it. And before we knew it, we had 500,000 soldiers there. And they were dying, and they were killing, and they were dying, and they were killing. And it's all on the feet, the bloody feet of Lyndon Johnson, a serial murderer who shot his way into the White House, is responsible for millions of deaths in Asia, is responsible for 31 deaths on the USS Liberty as he told Israel to attack an American ship so it could be blamed on Egypt, which is, you know, a horrifying thought that historians have not come to terms with, have not come to accept. But induction and deduction will tell you that Lyndon Johnson did that. All these people who are coming to the play The Great Society, which is a play by Robert Schenkkan, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, who went to the University of Texas, who, when he was an undergraduate, was, I believe, a friar, which is a very select club to be involved in. And so he grew up in a household that loved Lyndon Johnson. He said that before. So he's a shill for the legacy of Lyndon Johnson, Robert Schenkkan is. And he comes out of the University of Texas. He comes out of Austin, Texas. And, you know, I think he's missing the greater story, which is that Lyndon Johnson was a murderer. There are a lot of socialists in Austin, Texas. And they love Lyndon Johnson because he believed in socialism. It's not that Lyndon Johnson believed in education. He believed in government being an education.
Right.
It's not that Lyndon Johnson believed in medical care. He believed in government giving medical care to people, especially elderly care. So LBJ was a big government guy, a big kind of a food stamp kind of a guy, a big public housing guy, a big taxer. And he ran his political office like a business, and he made tens of millions of dollars being a crook in the political office. It's funny when we have these plays, like by Robert Schenkkan, if I pronounce that correctly, they never talk about the fact that Lyndon Johnson was a criminal of biblical proportions. It's highly relevant, you know. You had a criminal who loves using government to make money for himself and then stealing money from others and giving it to others for political patronage.
Wow.
LBJ was a pure political criminal and a political psychopath. And he's the kind of guy who could do anything, okay? You'd have to have a very good reason to murder Josepha. The reason he murdered John Kennedy was that he was about to be destroyed by Robert Kennedy and the Kennedy brothers and exposed for the corrupt thug he was. He murdered Sam Smithwick in prison. He had a reason. That reason was Sam Smithwick was going to talk about the ballot stuffing down in Jim Wells County in the 1948 Texas Democratic senatorial runoff between LBJ and Coke Stevenson. He murdered Henry Marshall in 1961 with his personal hitman Malcolm Wallace. He did that because Henry Marshall was deeply investigating the crimes of Billy Sol Estes, who was Lyndon Johnson's #1 vehicle for kickbacks. Estes later said he gave Lyndon Johnson $10 million. That's the equivalent of $70 million in the year 2016. So Lyndon Johnson was a fantastic criminal, and that's the story that needs to be told. Not he was just some sort of a wonderful, socialist signing legislation after legislation that we shouldn't really have to begin with. And what was changed was that there were a lot of defense contractors tied to Lyndon Johnson that made billions of dollars worth of money. Halliburton being one. Halliburton having bought out Brown and Root. Lyndon Johnson, Halliburton bought out Brown and Root in '63. Lyndon Johnson was extremely close to George Brown of Brown and Root since the 1930s when they were building dams for the government that LBJ was facilitating. So yes, it would have been a very big difference if Lyndon Johnson had not shot his way into the White House on November the 22nd, 1963. And I say that, just kind of sad that the mainstream media and the mainstream scholarship cannot accept that simple, basic truth. We talk about fake news today, about stories that are just made up. There's no greater lie, no bigger fake news than the mainstream media's treatment of the JFK assassination for 54 years, which is absurd, and it's a lie. And it says that a lone nut commie killed JFK when really it was Lyndon Johnson and the CIA and the rich people around LBJ in Texas. And I think a lot of people know that, and humans don't want to hear bad news, even if it's true. There are people who don't want to go to the doctor to check and see if they have cancer because they don't want to be potentially diagnosed with cancer. They almost would rather die and not know that they have cancer until the very end than actually go to the doctor and then potentially be diagnosed with cancer, because it just it freaks them out, the bad news. Same thing in political history. There are a lot of people who just don't want to know that Lyndon Johnson was a serial murderer because it's so discrediting to the American narrative, the American history, which is that we have a peaceful country and a peaceful transfer of power, and our presidents are not murderers when a good many of them are murderers, killers, murderers, criminals. Battle in the history books is what it is. It's a battle among historians, and a lot of times on controversial historical topics you have various factions. And will the faction of truth win out on the JFK assassination in America? I don't know. Because at what year? It's already been proven 100 times over that Lyndon Johnson, the CIA, murdered John Kennedy. Okay, and that Lee Harvey Oswald was U.S. counterintelligence, and that John Kennedy's being shot from both the front and from the back. These are all very simple truths. It's kind of like Donald Trump not wanting to accept simple truths about the crowd size at his inauguration. Okay, which was smaller than Barack Obama's, because Washington D.C. is a big Democratic town with a large minority population. They all turned out to see Barack Obama. Donald Trump's was smaller, but yet Donald Trump cannot accept the fact, will not state the fact, that fewer people were at his inauguration than Barack Obama's. So same thing with the history books. Truth be damned, these people's attitudes are. Let's believe the fantasy, because the truth hurts too much. The truth is so discredited. For me, the truth is purifying. And so I really don't understand people who behave otherwise. His gut instinct was right on. As was the gut instinct of Evelyn Lincoln, the 12-year secretary of JFK. On the way back from Dallas, she wrote down a list of her 7 top suspects in the JFK assassination. There were 7 of them. Evelyn Lincoln, she was very close to JFK. Her number 1 suspect was Lyndon. She was on the airplane with Lyndon Johnson back from Dallas to Washington, D.C. within just a few hours after the JFK assassination. She is listing Lyndon Johnson as her number 1 suspect in the JFK assassination. Sometimes people don't understand that there were multiple factions involved in the JFK assassination. Hey there, LBJ killed JFK, he's a murderer. Multiple factions were involved in the JFK assassination. Lyndon Johnson being number 1, being the mastermind, but the CIA being involved as well. General Edward Lansdale was identified there. E. Howard Hunt practically admitted he was involved in the JFK assassination. He said he was a backbencher. He said Frank Sturgis was involved, a longtime CIA operative. And then there's David Atlee Phillips, who was spotted being seen with Lee Harvey Oswald a few months before the JFK assassination, which means he was managing Oswald, which means Oswald was a patsy for the JFK assassination. LBJ killed JFK. He's a murderer. It's funny, Clay. I'm here at the Zachary Scott Theater for the play The Great Society about Lyndon Johnson. And the first person I talked to was a lady driving out of the parking lot of Zach Scott Theater. And I said, LBJ murdered JFK. And the first word she said was, he certainly had the motive. So, I mean, that's the first person I talked to today. Wow. The very first person. She probably works for Zach Scott Theater, might even be attending the play, or, you know, supportive of the arts in Austin. And so people know. So yes, there are people who are at this play who know that Lyndon Johnson was a serial murderer. So they can't go beyond that and say he did it for sure because the evidence says that. But they definitely know there's bad blood between Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedys. That's historically accepted by everybody. Nobody says they're friends, okay, or were friends. When Lyndon Johnson died, Secret Service says there was literally no picture of John Kennedy up at LBJ's house at the LBJ Ranch. You think there'd be one, like they were elected as partners in 1960, right? You think it was a horrible thing that John Kennedy died? You think there'd be some pictures that LBJ would have? Remember his old buddy John Kennedy? He hated John Kennedy. He hated Robert Kennedy. There were no pictures of the Kennedys up at his house, period. End of story.
If we
can get behind anybody and be positive and make it like a social scene, they'll do it. You know, I'm saying that they're grasping for straws for leadership.
That's true.
LBJ murdered JFK. He's a murderer. LBJ did it. Yeah, it's true. Big finger for you. LBJ murdered JFK. Come read all about it. They hated each other. Everybody knows it. Nobody questions that. Vietnam War, USS Liberty, Texas murders, John Kennedy, LBJ behind them all. LBJ murdered JFK. Oh, what they're doing, the LBJ legacy crowd, and I think it's a pretty awful thing because they're glorifying a man who was a serial murderer. And murderers, you're scamming me. Okay. Murderers don't believe in civil rights. Okay. So,
could you say that one more time?
Murderers, like Lyndon Johnson, by definition, don't believe in civil rights. So they're glorifying LBJ for civil rights, which he helped kill for 20 years in Congress, that he only supported after he murdered John Kennedy. And, you know, he pushed through this big slew of legislation in the 60s, which, you know, was bad for America, very, very bad for America, because socialism is very bad for people. And they want to glorify him for that because they're socialists and they love big government and they love publicly funded universities like the University of Texas, and they love basically sucking off somebody else's tit. And because they love that so much, they're willing to overlook all the mass murders of the Vietnam War, murdering John Kennedy, murdering Henry Marshall, murdering Sam Smith in prison, and Lyndon Johnson orchestrating the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty on June the 8th, 1967. That's how much these people love socialism.
And what's this poster about that you have?
I'm also promoting Roger Stone's book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. It shows a wanted poster of Lyndon Johnson with a frontal and a side shot of him. And that's the way Lyndon Johnson ought to be remembered.